Hi, I'm very happy to welcome today Charlie Cotton, the co-founder and CSO of Cambrium, a company that leverages innovative technologies to create the molecules and proteins of the future. But I don't know, Charlie, if you want to say a few words about yourself and Cambrium, actually, that would be great.
Sure. So I'm Charlie Cotton. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of Cambrium. And our mission at Cambrium is to accelerate the shift towards a bio-based economy by triggering the next wave of material innovation. So I often describe proteins as the kind of specialty chemicals of the 21st century because they have this amazing range of material properties, but are also fundamentally biodegradable.
I wanted to start maybe by asking you, in general, why sustainability important to Cambrium?
Yeah. So on a personal journey, sustainability has kind of been the reason for me to work with Cambrium and to start to commercialize technologies that I've been passionate about my whole life. Internally at Cambrium, we often refer to making materials that matter. And these materials that matter to us have to matter in two ways. One is their sustainability profile has to be better than the existing solutions. So that's the first way in which they matter. And the second is that they're produced at scale so that they end up in millions of products worldwide.
I just wanted to ask you, do you perceive, because I know you have been maybe engaging with some investors in the fundraising phase as you were gathering capital for your company, that investors are starting to really care more and more about sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a specific class of investors calling themselves impact investors today, and they have very stringent requirements on how their portfolio companies go about sustainability. So I think that's one class of investment which has very clear requirements. But in general, we see the investment space moving towards more sustainable technologies, and everyone is interested in this data. So.
What types of questions do investors usually ask you about your Cambrium's sustainability or ESG profile?
Yeah, I think investors typically think very analytically, so they like quantification. So usually that's things like greenhouse gas emissions, water usage, and these sorts of metrics become very important. But also frameworks around legal and regulatory become very important as well. So are you set up in order to be compliant under such and such a regulation? And what's your plan for in 5 years when this happens? So those questions do become important too. And it's good to be prepared.
And I think especially as now investors face increasingly stringent regulatory requirements, right? Regulations such as the SFDR, EU taxonomy, and sort of all the European action plan regulation package is really putting a lot of pressure on investors to actually gather granular data on the sustainability of their companies. Next I wanted to ask you, I mean, you're a startup, and I think that as we all startups have very high constraints in terms of time and resources that they can allocate to different projects. And so I wanted to ask you, are there any specific roadblocks that you face as you were trying to gather this data?
Yeah, I think when we started to get into the data side of things, there first needs to be some consideration around which data to collect, because particularly as a B2B chemicals company producing a physical product, there's so many different kinds of data I could collect about our manufacturing process, our supply chain, for example, and honing down the kinds of data you need to collect and track at this point in your company's life cycle, I think is probably the first constraint or roadblock. And the second is simply prioritizing them for your goals as a company. So, because you can't do everything from day one.
Which data is the hardest to collect in your space?
I think, yeah, to speak about the manufacturing a little bit, we have to work with third parties at various points and supply and logistics. And there you have to be very careful about the kind of data you ask for and be very clear about what you need and why. There's no generalized standard state-of-the-art data package that anyone has for any of these things. So it's still kind of a bespoke question.
And I mean, I know you worked with the Brink team actually to sort of hone and refine your sustainability profile and sort of narrative, not only to bring to investors, but also for your own business intelligence or sustainability intelligence purposes. So I wanted to ask you, of course, how did that go?
Yeah. So the question we were working with Brink on is, how can I present our company under the current EU regulations? So the current taxonomy for Article 9 funds. And what does that framework look like? How might Cambrian be presented in this light? What kind of data might we need to collect in order to work with these kinds of investment funds in any funding round? And so we had a very clear idea of what we were working on together. And I think Brink brought that framework in those discussions together. It's kind of a question and answer format.
And is there anything that surprised you in particular as you were presented the results of this analysis?
Yeah, the first surprising response was empathy for the regulators. So I think I was surprised at some of the aspects they have to consider for every business, because they're trying to regulate the whole space of new technology to a certain extent and existing technology. So there's just so many different risks and aspects which must be properly identified. And then beyond that, it kind of opened my mind to new kinds of data Cambrian might want to collect as well. So I, hadn't been thinking particularly about a corruption minimum safeguard, or perhaps even, thinking about our own pollution from things like water, because I see, our production methods is fundamentally friendly. But in the future, these are pieces of data that I might need to collect in 5-10 years' time as things scale. So I think I was interested to see the breadth of data that could be relevant for this framework.
Yeah, and I think that data will also be very useful for the future, right? For your future planning and thinking ahead about how to build a sustainable company. Have you approached any investors after working with Brink, and how did they respond to this?
So when working with Brink, I was given a really nice kind of prioritized list of work I can do. And I haven't shown investors the work we've done together yet, because I'm consolidating a package. And I think that's one interesting way to think about this sustainability discussion is you need to prepare an understanding for the different stages of your company. So right now I'm getting to polishing those steps, getting the final pieces of data, which round it off for this year.
I mean, maybe as a second to last question, is there any advice that you would give to any other startup that is starting to think about, okay, how do I sort of craft my sustainability narrative? How do I approach these requests from investors?
Yeah, so usually with things like sustainability, I'd like to think about it deeply myself, and I'd like to see if I can get involved and understand the regulation. But my experience so far has been this regulation is both too complex and too important to do it alone. So I think enlisting the help of experts early on makes a lot of sense. And early on kind of being an operative word there, because the earlier you engage with it, the more in your subconscious, it will be clear how different things will fit into different futures for the company. So I think that would be my advice. Start early and get help, because wading through this regulation on your own is not going to be a barrel of laughs.
And is there any advice that you would give to investors? So VCs, growth stage investors that maybe care about impact or are facing regulatory pressure that are starting to approach their portfolio companies with these, or target companies with these questions?
Yeah, I think they've generally been very forward thinking about applying these frameworks for their portfolio companies and are doing some very good work in that space. I would say that the amount of data collection on the portfolio company side is very, very high, and there's a burden associated with that. So these kinds of new tools like Brink that are coming about are a really easy way to help them connect their companies to other companies that can de-risk basically what is a complicated and time-intensive process.
Looking ahead now a little bit, how will you integrate the insights that you gathered together with the Brink team in your future sustainability or ESG strategy kind of as you grow as a company?
So the first step is this consolidation of a single state of the sustainability profile today. And then I think there's a continuation of that work. Again, we have this prioritized list of where one can go year on year. And in the long term, I hope to get a certification for the organization as a whole as a result of the work we're doing together.
Great. Thank you so much, Charlie. It was really nice having you here. Is there anything that you would like to add to what we just shared, maybe for startups or investors that are getting started with this?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the hard work from the Brink team. I really enjoyed working with everyone. And I think towards startups, it's never too early to start on this topic. I think that was a learning for me as well. The minute you have a product idea, you should probably be thinking about how does it how is this going to work from a sustainability perspective and what data might I collect? And then I think to investors, you know how busy your teams already are and that this is a new requirement of them if they want to play in the space. So yeah, I think keep thinking of ways to help them speed up this process and collect the right data.
Thank you very much, Charlie, for your time.
Thank you.